Chapter 38. Rain. One solitary meets another. It was now 5 o'clock, and the dawn was promising to break in hues of drab and ash. The air changed its temperature and stirred itself more vigorously. Cool breezes coursed in transparent eddies round Oak's face. The wind shifted yet a point or two and blew stronger. In 10 minutes every wind of heaven seemed to be roaming at large. Some of the thatching on the wheat stacks was now whirled fantastically aloft, and had to be replaced and weighted with some rails that lay near at hand. This done, Oak slaved away again at the barley. A huge drop of rain smote his face. The wind snarled round every corner. The trees rocked to the bases of their trunks, and the twigs clashed in strife. Driving in spars at any point and on any system, inch by inch he covered more and more safely from ruin this distracting impersonation of £700. The rain came on in earnest, and Oak soon felt the water to be tracking cold and clammy roots down his back. Ultimately he was reduced well nigh to a homogeneous sop, and the dyes of his clothes trickled down and stood in a pool at the foot of the ladder. The rain stretched obliquely through the dull atmosphere in liquid spines, unbroken in continuity between their beginnings in the clouds and their points in him. Oak suddenly remembered that 8 months before this time he had been fighting against fire in the same spot as desperately as he was fighting against water now, and for a futile love of the same woman. As for her— But Oak was generous and true, and dismissed his reflections. It was about 7 o'clock in the dark leaden morning when Gabriel came down from the last stack, and thankfully exclaimed, "It is done." He was drenched, weary, and sad, and yet not so sad as drenched and weary, for he was cheered by a sense of success in a good cause. Faint sounds came from the barn, and he looked that way. Figures stepped singly and in pairs through the doors, all walking awkwardly and abashed, save the foremost, who wore a red jacket and advanced with his hands in his pockets, whistling. The others shambled after with a conscience-stricken air. The whole procession was not unlike Flaxman's group of the suitors tottering on towards the infernal regions under the conduct of Mercury. The gnarled shapes passed into the village, Troy, their leader, entering the farmhouse. Not a single one of them had turned his face to the ricks, or apparently bestowed one thought upon their condition. Soon Oak too went homeward, by a different route from theirs. In front of him, against the wet glazed surface of the lane, he saw a person walking yet more slowly than himself, under an umbrella. The man turned and plainly started. He was Boldwood. "How are you this morning, sir?" said Oak. "Yes, 'tis a wet day." "Oh, I am well, very well, thank you, quite well." "I'm glad to hear it, sir." Boldwood seemed to awake to the present by degrees. "You look tired and ill, Oak," he said then, desultorily regarding his companion. "I am tired. You look strangely altered, sir." "I? Not a bit of it. I am well enough. What put that into your head?" "I thought you didn't look quite so topping as you used to, that was all." "Indeed? Then you are mistaken," said Boldwood shortly. "Nothing hurts me. My constitution is an iron one." "I've been working hard to get our ricks covered, and was barely in time. Never had such a struggle in my life. Yours, of course, are safe, sir." "Oh, yes," Boldwood added, after an interval of silence. "What did you ask, Oak?" "Your ricks are all covered before this time." "No." "At any rate the large ones upon the stone staddles." "They are not." "Them under the hedge?" "No. I forgot to tell the thatcher to set about it." "Nor the little one by the stile?" "Nor the little one by the stile. I overlooked the ricks this year." "Then not a tenth of your corn will come to measure, sir." "Possibly not." "Overlooked them," Gabriel repeated to himself. It is difficult to describe the intensely dramatic effect that announcement had upon Oak at such a moment. All the night he had been feeling that the neglect he was labouring to repair was abnormal and isolated. the only instance of the kind within the circuit of the county. Yet at this very time, within the same parish, a greater waste had been going on, uncomplained of and disregarded. A few months earlier Boldwood's forgetting his husbandry would have been as preposterous an idea as a sailor forgetting he was on a ship. Oak was just thinking that whatever he himself might have suffered from Bathsheba's marriage, there was a man who had suffered more, when Boldwood spoke in a changed voice, that of one who yearned to make a confidence and relieve his heart by an outpouring. "Oak, you know as well as I that things have gone wrong with me lately. I may as well own it. I was going to get a little settled in life, but in some way my plan has come to nothing." "I thought my mistress would have married you," said Gabriel, not knowing enough of the full depths of Boldwood's love to keep silence on the farmer's account, and determined not to evade discipline by doing so on his own. "However, it is so sometimes, and nothing happens that we expect," he added, with the repose of a man whom misfortune had injured rather than subdued. "I dare say I am a joke about the parish," said Boldwood, as if the subject came irresistibly to his tongue, and with a miserable lightness meant to express his indifference. "Oh no, I don't think that." "But the real truth of the matter is that there was not, as some fancy, any jilting on her part. No engagement ever existed between me and Miss Everdene. People say so, but it is untrue. She never promised me." Boldwood stood still now, and turned his wild face to Oak. "Oh, Gabriel," he continued, "I am weak and foolish, and I don't know what, and I can't fend off my miserable grief. I had some faint belief in the mercy of God till I lost that woman. Yes, he prepared a gourd to shade me, and like the prophet I thanked him, and was glad. But the next day he prepared a worm to smite the gourd and wither it, and I feel it is better to die than to live." A silence followed. Boldwood aroused himself from the momentary mood of confidence into which he had drifted, and walked on again, resuming his usual reserve. "No, Gabriel," he resumed with a carelessness which was like the smile on the countenance of a skull. "It was made more of by other people than ever it was by us. I do feel a little regret occasionally, but no woman ever had power over me for any length of time. Well, good morning. I can trust you not to mention to others what has passed between us two here." Chapter 39. Coming Home. A Cry. On the turnpike road between Casterbridge and Weatherbury, and about 3 miles from the former place, is Yalbury Hill, one of those steep, long ascents which pervade the highways of this undulating part of South Wessex. In returning from market it is usual for the farmers and other gig gentry to alight at the bottom and walk up. One Saturday evening in the month of October, Bathsheba's vehicle was duly creeping up this incline. She was sitting listlessly in the second seat of the gig, whilst walking beside her in a farmer's marketing suit of unusually fashionable cut was an erect, well-made young man. Though on foot, he held the reins and whip, and occasionally aimed light cuts at the horse's ear with the end of the lash as a recreation. This man was her husband, formerly Sergeant Troy, who, having bought his discharge with Bathsheba's money, was gradually transforming himself into a farmer of a spirited and very modern school. People of unalterable ideas still insisted upon calling him Sergeant when they met him, which was in some degree owing to his having still retained the well-shaped moustache of his military days, and the soldierly bearing inseparable from his form and training. "Yes, if it hadn't been for that wretched rain I should have cleared 200 as easy as looking, my love," he was saying. "Don't you see, it altered all the chances. To speak like a book I once read, wet weather is the narrative, and fine days are the episodes, of our country's history. Now, isn't that true?" "But the time of year has come for changeable weather." "Well, yes. The fact is, these autumn races are the ruin of everybody. Never did I see such a day as 'twas. 'Tis a wild open place, just out of Budmouth, and a drab sea rolled in towards us like liquid misery. Wind and rain, good Lord! Dark, why 'twas as dark as my hat before the last race was run. 'Twas 5 o'clock, and you couldn't see the horses till they were almost in, leave alone colours. The ground was heavy as lead, and all judgment from a fellow's experience went for nothing. Horses, riders, people were all blown about like ships at sea. 3 booths were blown over, and the wretched folk inside crawled out upon their hands and knees, and in the next field were as many as a dozen hats at one time. Ah, Pimpernel regularly stuck fast, when about 60 yards off, and when I saw Policy stepping on, it did knock my heart against the lining of my ribs, I assure you, my love."
"And you mean, Frank," said Bathsheba sadly. Her voice was painfully lowered from the fullness and vivacity of the previous summer, "that you have lost more than £100 in a month by this dreadful horse racing? Oh, Frank, it is cruel, it is foolish of you to take away my money so. We shall have to leave the farm, that will be the end of it."
"Humbug about cruel! Now, there 'tis again, turn on the waterworks. That's just like you."
"But you'll promise me not to go to Budmouth's second meeting, won't you?" she implored. Bathsheba was at the full depth for tears, but she maintained a dry eye.
"I don't see why I should. In fact, if it turns out to be a fine day, I was thinking of taking you."
"Never, never! I'll go 100 miles the other way first. I hate the sound of the very word."
"But the question of going to see the race or staying at home has very little to do with the matter. Bets are all booked safely enough before the race begins, you may depend. Whether it's a bad race for me or a good one will have very little to do with our going there next Monday."
"But you don't mean to say that you have risked anything on this one too?" she exclaimed with an agonized look.
"There now, don't be a little fool. Wait till you are told. Why, Bathsheba, you have lost all the pluck and sauciness you formerly had, and upon my life, if I had known what a chicken-hearted creature you were under all your boldness, I'd never have—I know what."
A flash of indignation might have been seen in Bathsheba's dark eyes as she looked resolutely ahead after this reply. They moved on without further speech, some early withered leaves from the trees which hooded the road at this spot occasionally spinning downward across their path to the earth. A woman appeared on the brow of the hill. The ridge was in a cutting, so that she was very near the husband and wife before she became visible. Troy had turned towards the gig to remount, and whilst putting his foot on the step the woman passed behind him. Though the overshadowing trees and the approach of eventide enveloped them in the gloom, Bathsheba could see plainly enough to discern the extreme poverty of the woman's garb and the sadness of her face. "Please, sir, do you know what time Casterbridge Union House closes at night?" The woman said these words to Troy over his shoulder. Troy started visibly at the sound of the voice, yet he seemed to recover presence of mind sufficient to prevent himself from giving way to his impulse to suddenly turn and face her. He said slowly, "I don't know." The woman, on hearing him speak, quickly looked up, examined the side of his face, and recognized the soldier under the yeoman's garb. Her face was drawn into an expression which had gladness and agony both among its elements. She uttered a hysterical cry and fell down. "Oh, poor thing!" exclaimed Bathsheba, instantly preparing to alight. "Stay where you are and attend to the horse," said Troy, peremptorily throwing her the reins and the whip. "Walk the horse to the top. I'll see to the woman." "But I—"
"Do you hear? Pop it."
The horse, gig, and Bathsheba moved on.
"How on earth did you come here? I thought you were miles away, or dead. Why didn't you write to me?" said Troy to the woman, in a strangely gentle yet hurried voice, as he lifted her up.
"I feared to."
"Have you any money?" "None." "Good heaven! I wish I had more to give you. Here's—wretched, the merest trifle. It is every farthing I have. I have none but what my wife gives me, you know, and I can't ask her now."
The woman made no answer.
"I have only another moment," continued Troy. "And now listen. Where are you going tonight? Casterbridge Union?"
"Yes, I thought to go there."
"You shan't go there. Yet, wait. Yes, perhaps for tonight. I can do nothing better, worse luck. Sleep there tonight and stay there tomorrow. Monday is the first free day I have, and on Monday morning, at 10 exactly, meet me on Gray's Bridge, just out of the town. I'll bring all the money I can muster. You shan't want.
I'll see that, Fanny. Then I'll get you a lodging somewhere. Goodbye till then. I am a brute, but goodbye." After advancing the distance which completed the ascent of the hill, Bathsheba turned her head. The woman was upon her feet, and Bathsheba saw her withdrawing from Troy and going feebly down the hill by the third milestone from Casterbridge. Troy then came on towards his wife, stepped into the gig, took the reins from her hand, and without making any observation whipped the horse into a trot. He was rather agitated. "Do you know who that woman was?" said Bathsheba, looking searchingly into his face. "I do," he said, looking boldly back into hers. "I thought you did," she said with angry hauteur, and still regarding him. "Who is she?" He suddenly seemed to think that frankness would benefit neither of the women. "Nothing to either of us," he said. "I know her by sight." "What's her name?" "How should I know her name?" "I think you do." "Think if you will, and be—" The sentence was completed by a smart cut of the whip round Poppet's flank, which caused the animal to start forward at a wild pace. No more was said. Chapter 40. On Casterbridge Highway. For a considerable time the woman walked on. Her steps became feebler, and she strained her eyes to look far upon the naked road, now indistinct amid the penumbra of night. At length her onward walk dwindled to the merest totter, and she opened a gate within which was a haystack. Underneath this she sat down, and presently slept. When the woman awoke, it was to find herself in the depths of a moonless and starless night. A heavy, unbroken crust of cloud stretched across the sky, shutting out every speck of heaven, and a distant halo which hung over the town of Casterbridge was visible against the black concave, the luminosity appearing the brighter by its great contrast with the circumscribing darkness. Towards this weak, soft glow the woman turned her eyes. "If only I could get there," she said. "Meet him the day after tomorrow. God help me! Perhaps I shall be in my grave before then." A manor-house clock from the far depths of shadow struck the hour 1 in a small attenuated tone. After midnight the voice of a clock seems to lose in breadth as much as in length, and to diminish its sonorousness to a thin falsetto. Afterwards a light, two lights, arose from the remote shade, and grew larger. A carriage rolled along the road and past the gate. It probably contained some late diners out. The beam from one lamp shone for a moment upon the crouching woman, and threw her face into vivid relief. The face was young in the groundwork, old in the finish. The general contours were flexuous and childlike, but the finer lineaments had begun to be sharp and thin. The pedestrian stood up, apparently with revived determination, and looked around. The road appeared to be familiar to her, and she carefully scanned the fence as she slowly walked along. Presently there became visible a dim white shape. It was another milestone. She drew her fingers across its face to feel the marks. "2 more," she said. She leant against the stone as a means of rest for a short interval, then bestirred herself, and again pursued her way. For a slight distance she bore up bravely, afterwards flagging as before. This was beside a lone copsewood, wherein heaps of white chips strewn upon the leafy ground showed that woodmen had been faggoting and making hurdles during the day. Now there was not a rustle, not a breeze, not the faintest clash of twigs to keep her company. The woman looked over the gate, opened it, and went in. Close to the entrance stood a row of faggots, bound and unbound, together with stakes of all sizes. For a few seconds the wayfarer stood, with that tense stillness which signifies itself not to be the end, but merely the suspension of a previous motion. Her attitude was that of a person who listens, either to the external world of sound or to the imagined discourse of thought. A close criticism might have detected signs proving that she was intent on the latter alternative. Moreover, as was shown by what followed,
She was oddly exercising the faculty of invention upon the speciality of the clever Jacques Droz, the designer of automatic substitutes for human limbs. By the aid of the Casterbridge aurora, and by feeling with her hands, the woman selected two sticks from the heaps. These sticks were nearly straight, to the height of 3 or 4 feet, where each branched into a fork, like the letter Y. She sat down, snapped off the small upper twigs, and carried the remainder with her to the road. She placed one of these forks under each arm as a crutch, tested them, timidly threw her whole weight upon them, so little that it was, and swung herself forward. The girl had made for herself a material aid. The crutches answered well. The pat of her feet and the tap of her sticks upon the highway were all the sounds that came from the traveller now. She had passed the last milestone by a good long distance, and began to look wistfully towards the bank as if calculating upon another milestone soon. The crutches, though so very useful, had their limits of power. Mechanism only transfers labour, being powerless to supersede it, and the original amount of exertion was not cleared away. It was thrown into the body and arms. She was exhausted, and each swing forward became fainter. At last she swayed sideways and fell. Here she lay, a shapeless heap, for 10 minutes and more. The morning wind began to boom dully over the flats, and to move afresh dead leaves which had lain still since yesterday. The woman desperately turned round upon her knees, and next rose to her feet. Steadying herself by the help of one crutch, she essayed a step, then another, then a third, using the crutches now as walking sticks only. Thus she progressed till, descending Mellstock Hill, another milestone appeared, and soon the beginning of an iron-railed fence came into view. She staggered across to the first post, clung to it, and looked around. The Casterbridge lights were now individually visible. It was getting towards morning, and vehicles might be hoped for, if not expected soon. She listened. There was not a sound of life, save that acme and sublimation of all dismal sounds, the bark of a fox, its 3 hollow notes being rendered at intervals of a minute with the precision of a funeral bell. "Less than a mile," the woman murmured. "No, more," she added after a pause. "The mile is only to the county hall, and my resting place is on the other side of Casterbridge. A little over a mile, and there I am." After an interval she again spoke. "5 or 6 steps to a yard. 6 perhaps. I've got to go 1700 yards. 100 times 6, 600. 17 times that. Oh, pity me, Lord." Holding to the rail she advanced, thrusting one hand forward upon the rail, then the other, then leaning over it whilst she dragged her feet on beneath. This woman was not given to soliloquy, but extremity of feeling lessens the individuality of the weak, as it increases that of the strong. She said again in the same tone, "I'll believe that the end lies 5 posts forward, and no further, and so get strength to pass them." This was a practical application of the principle that a half-feigned and fictitious faith is better than no faith at all. She passed 5 posts, and held on to the 5th. "I'll pass 5 more by believing my longed-for spot is at the next 5th. I can do it." She passed 5 more. "It lies only 5 further." She passed 5 more. "But it is 5 further." She passed them. "That stone bridge is the end of my journey," she said, when the bridge over the Froom was in view. She crawled to the bridge. During the effort each breath of the woman went into the air, as if never to return again. "Now for the truth of the matter," she said, sitting down. "The truth is that I have less than half a mile." Self-beguilement, with what she had known all the time to be false, had given her strength to come over half a mile that she would have been powerless to face in the lump. The artifice showed that the woman, by some mysterious intuition, had grasped the paradoxical truth that blindness may operate more vigorously than prescience. and the short-sighted effect more than the far-seeing, that limitation and not comprehensiveness is needed for striking a blow. A half-mile now stood before the sick and weary woman like a stolid juggernaut. It was an impassive king of her world. The road here ran across Durnover Moor, open to the road on either side. She surveyed the wide space, the lights, herself, sighed and lay down against the guardstone of the bridge. Never was ingenuity exercised so sorely as the traveller here exercised hers. Every conceivable aid, method, stratagem, mechanism by which these last desperate 800 yards could be overpassed by a human being unperceived was resolved in her busy brain, and dismissed as impracticable. She thought of sticks, wheels, crawling; she even thought of rolling, but the exertion demanded by either of these latter two was greater than to walk erect. The faculty of contrivance was worn out. Hopelessness had come at last. "No further," she whispered, and closed her eyes. From the stripe of shadow on the opposite side of the bridge a portion of shade seemed to detach itself and move into isolation upon the pale white of the road. It glided noiselessly towards the recumbent woman. She became conscious of something touching her hand. It was softness, and it was warmth. She opened her eyes, and the substance touched her face. A dog was licking her cheek. He was a huge, heavy, and quiet creature, standing darkly against the low horizon, and at least 2 feet higher than the present position of her eyes. Whether Newfoundland, Mastiff, Bloodhound, or what not, it was impossible to say. He seemed to be of too strange and mysterious a nature to belong to any variety among those of popular nomenclature. Being thus assignable to no breed, he was the ideal embodiment of canine greatness, a generalization from what was common to all. Night, in its sad, solemn, and benevolent aspect, apart from its stealthy and cruel side, was personified in this form. Darkness endows the small and ordinary ones among mankind with poetical power, and even the suffering woman threw her idea into figure. In her reclining position she looked up to him, just as in earlier times she had, when standing, looked up to a man. The animal, who was as homeless as she, respectfully withdrew a step or two when the woman moved, and seeing that she did not repulse him, he licked her hand again. A thought moved within her like lightning. Perhaps I can make use of him. I might do it then. She pointed in the direction of Casterbridge, and the dog seemed to misunderstand. He trotted on. Then, finding she could not follow, he came back and whined. The ultimate and saddest singularity of woman's effort and invention was reached when, with a quickened breathing, she rose to a stooping posture, and resting her 2 little arms upon the shoulders of the dog, leant firmly thereon, and murmured stimulating words. Whilst she sorrowed in her heart, she cheered with her voice, and what was stranger than that the strong should need encouragement from the weak, was that cheerfulness should be so well stimulated by such utter dejection. Her friend moved forward slowly, and she with small mincing steps moved forward beside him, half her weight being thrown upon the animal. Sometimes she sank as she had sunk from walking erect, from the crutches, from the rails. The dog, who now thoroughly understood her desire and her incapacity, was frantic in his distress on these occasions. He would tug at her dress and run forward. She always called him back, and it was now to be observed that the woman listened for human sounds only to avoid them. It was evident that she had an object in keeping her presence on the road and her forlorn state unknown. Their progress was necessarily very slow. They reached the bottom of the town, and the Casterbridge lamps lay before them like fallen Pleiads as they turned to the left into the dense shade of a deserted avenue of chestnuts, and so skirted the borough. Thus the town was passed, and the goal was reached. On this much-desired spot outside the town rose a picturesque building. Originally it had been a mere case to hold people. The shell had been so thin, so devoid of excrescence, and so closely drawn over the accommodation granted, that the grim character of what was beneath showed through it,
as the shape of a body is visible under a winding sheet. Then nature, as if offended, lent a hand. Masses of ivy grew up completely covering the walls, till the place looked like an abbey, and it was discovered that the view from the front, over the Casterbridge chimneys, was one of the most magnificent in the county. A neighbouring earl once said that he would give up a year's rental to have at his own door the view enjoyed by the inmates from theirs, and very probably the inmates would have given up the view for his year's rental. This stone edifice consisted of a central mass and two wings, whereon stood as sentinels a few slim chimneys, now gurgling sorrowfully to the slow wind. In the wall was a gate, and by the gate a bell-pull formed of a hanging wire. The woman raised herself as high as possible upon her knees, and could just reach the handle. She moved it, and fell forwards in a bowed attitude, her face upon her bosom. It was getting on towards 6 o'clock, and sounds of movement were to be heard inside the building which was the haven of rest to this wearied soul. A little door by the large one was opened, and a man appeared inside. He discerned the panting heap of clothes, went back for a light, and came again. He entered a second time, and returned with two women. These lifted the prostrate figure and assisted her in through the doorway. The man then closed the door. "How did she get here?" said one of the women. "The Lord knows," said the other. "There's a dog outside," murmured the overcome traveller. "Where has he gone? He helped me." "I stoned him away," said the man. The little procession then moved forward, the man in front bearing the light, the two bony women next supporting between them the small and supple one. Thus they entered the house and disappeared.